Hi, I'm State Senator Joe Markley. I'm standing outside of the Senate chamber where we are in fact in session today. It's Wednesday and we're here to do judges, referees, and other judicial appointments. That's been the main business that's taken place in the Senate chamber so far this session. The rest of the business across the way in the Legislative Office Building is committee work, and that's still ongoing, still doing public hearings, still just beginning to vote to send bills out of committee. And I'll talk about some of that legislation as it starts to come over here to the floor. I want to talk today about the judges, and I also want to touch on the budget questions which are on everybody's mind. Most of these judicial nominations go through unanimously. If there's no strong evidence brought to us that somebody's got a problem of temperament, a problem of competency or ethics, judges are appointed and reappointed. But especially when it comes to the state Supreme Court, we have the opportunity to look at the judges' decisions and to try to understand what their judicial philosophy is. And because of that, one Supreme Court justice, Justice Palmer, who's been on since the 90s, he was appointed by Governor Weicker, has come under a great deal of scrutiny. I served for the first time on the Judiciary Committee, so I had the chance to question him at hearings on the Judiciary Committee. And I questioned him specifically on the famous decision, Kelo versus the City of New London, which involves eminent domain and the right of the state to take private property for various purposes. In this case, what was unusual about Kelo versus New London is the state was not taking the private property for public purposes, but taking them from private homeowners to turn it over to a private corporation, with the reasoning being that it was better for the City of New London that the corporation had the land than the private citizens had the land. The irony in this particular case is the company that took the land, Pfizer Chemicals, ended up moving out of New London. The neighborhood was completely destroyed and nothing was ever built there. It's now vacant lots. Judge Palmer wrote the decision in the Kelo case and was in a narrow decision, was a deciding vote. So I questioned him about that rather narrowly, and I can't say I was entirely satisfied with his answers. To some extent, his answer was, I was trying to anticipate what the U.S. Supreme Court would do in my reasoning. And I said, isn't your job to figure it out according to your own lights, not to try to anticipate what some other court is going to do on review? And it was a very good exchange, and I felt like he was very honest in his answers. But he was a little taken aback at the question, and it was, among other things, something that made me think that I don't really see him acting as a judge the way that I would want to see a judge acting. Another decision that he wrote was the one that overturned the death penalty. You know, we passed a piece of legislation against my opposition and the opposition of my Republican colleagues to do away with the death penalty prospectively. In other words, it wouldn't be imposed anymore, but the people on death row would still be executed. That was particularly the case because of the murderers in the Cheshire home invasion case. At the time it was passed, many legislators, myself included, said the courts are going to vacate all the death penalty judgments based on this legislation. But the proponents said it is very clear that our intention is that only future death penalty imposition be prohibited, that the existing people be executed. Nonetheless, the judges, led by Judge Palmer, cast aside legislative intent and did away with the death penalty, thus relieving these very violent, vicious criminals on death row from facing the penalty for their actions. For that reason, when we vote shortly, I will vote against Justice Palmer's reappointment, as will a number of Republicans, and possibly even a Democrat or two. All that said, if I have to predict, I'd say that he will pass, but he will pass by a narrow margin. I hope that judges start to pay attention to what legislators think, because we are the voice of the people effectively. And I think that it's only right for us to try to bring the concerns of our constituents to our judgment in decisions about judicial appointments. Briefly, and not to take you too much of your time, I want to say that the budget process on the Appropriations Committee moves forward as it usually does. I still feel like that is a bit of what they call a Potemkin village, that it looks like a budget process, but it's not where the real budget is going to come from. There's going to be a negotiation behind closed doors between the governor and legislative Democratic and Republican leaders, the powers that be effectively, and that's where the real budget is going to come. I hope that happens sooner rather than later. I feel very bad for the impact we're having on municipalities, which are now putting a budget together based on the governor's budget, which I think everybody in this building will tell you is going nowhere. So the good news is, if the towns pass a budget that have tax increases because of the governor's budget, my prediction is those tax increases in the end will not be necessary, and the town's going to be in a position to come back and reduce the taxes. The bad news is, because we are slow in our operations and send mixed signals, the towns have to act without having the information they need. I apologize on behalf of the legislature for that. You know, the procedure up here has been a concern of mine. I have seen some glimmers of improvement, but I will stay on it. That's a rather long explanation of a couple of rather sticky problems, but I appreciate your attention, and I will be back to you in a week or two with another update.